Mary knelt down, running her hand through the desert sand. It sifted through her fingers, trickling down.
It's so hot and dry here. She looked at David. It's nothing like West Virginia, is it?
David crossed his arms and leaned against the stone shop.
It's Tehran. What did you expect?
She sighed and looked at her arm.
I'm sorry, but my arm is red and it burns. This place is like an oven.
Shut up. You're annoying,
David said, shaking his head.
This Iranian city is no different than any American city.
Mary looked at him briefly, then averting her eyes to the city. Stone and glass buildings with shops stood as far as the eye could see.
Well, it looks different to me.
Embarrassed, she leaned against a shop and pretended to watch a television inside. She saw a glimpse of his arm move and looked at him to see. He pointed to a teenage local girl with a red hijab.
Follow her. I want that girl. I'll be watching.
Mary nodded to David.
I'll do a good job for you.
She watched the girl cross the street. Mary adjusted her blue hijab and looked both ways before crossing the street. Mary followed the teenage girl from a distance, entranced by the red hijab she wore. She thought of David for a moment, smiling dreamily. She blinked a few times, knowing it was important to keep her head in the mission, at least for now. She closed in on her target, a young Muslim girl no older than 17. She hid around the corner as the girl met and held the hand of a small girl, who Mary assumed was her younger sister. They crossed crowded sidewalks to a building that looked like a school. Mary stopped in an alleyway, opened her phone. She's walking her sister to school. What is so important about her anyway? Mary looked around, trying to remain undetected. She readjusted her headscarf while she waited. Her phone vibrated. She is the most skilled of all the girls I am collecting. Mary sighed. I don't think she's special. She followed her target to a small building made of yellow painted stone, with a girl greeted by an older lady. Her younger sister ran inside, met by other children. Mary watched from the alleyway. After checking to make sure no one was watching her, she crept closer to the building and sat on the bench. David sauntered to her side from behind. Her heart raced as he got close.
David, I want to tell you something. From the very first time I seen you a month ago,
She smiled, admiring his silent charm and strange aura. And his body. She looked down for a moment, contemplating what to say next. That body of yours. Only a shapeshifter could achieve it. David didn't look at her, maintaining his eye on the Muslim girl.
You're an idiot.
Mary locked up, feeling a tear in her eye. She took a deep breath and smelled his scent. She felt like a prisoner to his magical aura. It charmed her inner soul, only making it more impossible for her to resist his will. She shook her head and clenched her hands in a fist.
Are you going to kill me?
No.
David put his head in his hand, propping his chin up. Mary sighed with relief and crossed her arms. She watched the Muslim girl, squinting her eyes.
What's so special about her?
She tried to see what David saw in her.
She's on the move.
David cleared his throat in frustration. They stood and followed her to a skate park where the Iranian girl met two other teenage girls holding skateboards. David and Mary took a seat in the bleachers, watching. The girls skated and performed advanced tricks to Mary's amazement.
I thought the women here were uncultured and uneducated, but here they are skating and having a good time.
Her name is Raha, and she is extremely violent. She was partnered with Claire, a woman who kills for fun.
This skinny Muslim girl?
Mary rolled her eyes.
She doesn't look that tough to me.
Raha stopped skating for a moment and looked towards them. She pointed and whispered something to her friends before skateboarding again.
Don't point your finger at me, bitch,
Mary snarled, grabbing the seat of the bleachers.
She already pisses me off.
David shook his head.
Shut up and sit down.
Mary froze for a moment. She sat with her hands in her lap, her eyes open in terror. She glanced at him and wiped her forehead. Her exhilaration quickly waned under the scorching desert sun, which pulsated through exotic red clouds as it lowered on the horizon.
David, I can't take this heat anymore.
Mary took off her hijab she'd worn to blend in. She ran her fingers through her waist's lithe blonde hair.
Fix your head dressing.
David snapped, his features rigid.
The people around her will give you trouble if it's not right. They will confiscate your passport, or worse.
Mary's innocent eyes were caught in David's glance.
Will they really take my passport?
He looked up at the sky, taking a deep breath.
We aren't the average tourists, are we?
She adjusted her job, staring into David's eyes. As out of place as she felt here, she loved pleasing David. She was addicted to his aura. It enveloped her inside and out.
I will never leave you, David.
Mary rocked back and forth in the bleachers, eager to prove herself to him.
I want to know why you're collecting girls. If I'm going to help you, I need to know what's going on.
David stared silently at Mary, his eyes half open as if he was bored, turning his gaze back to the skaters.
I'm collecting these girls because she is linked to monsters around here.
That doesn't explain how you know all this. Who taught you about these things?
Mary asked. She looked away, not expecting an answer. David smirked.
I lost everything to them. My life, my family, my friends. I have lost count of how many girls like yourself have died under my supervision.
She snapped her head around to look at him, opening her mouth, surprised. She tried to think of something to say. She hadn't expected his answer, much less one denoting so much pain.
David?
David straightened and looked straight ahead.
Just know I'm here to protect humans.
Humans?
Mary looked at him, puzzled. David had always been an enigma, never ceasing to amaze her.
You sound weird and creepy again. I never asked you this, but are you American? You don't talk like us.
No,
David sighed and looked at the desert sky in his aversion to answering questions about himself, this question leaving him visually dismayed.
I was wondering when you would ask me that.
She frowned, knowing that he rarely smiled at light-hearted humor. She only seen him smile in the face of danger.
I'm British.
David pointed at the police officer entering the park.
I want you to tell me what you see.
Mary squinted her eyes.
A police officer walking drunk, holding a nightstick.
The Iranian girls adjusted their hijabs. The officer talked to the three girls, out of earshot of Mary and David. Mary stood for a moment.
I can't hear anything. He's going to kill that girl.
I want you to sit here with me and watch.
Mary looked at David, terrified. She gulped. The girls were backing away nervously from the officer. Mary glanced at David for a moment and intentionally nudged her.
You're not here to watch me.
Mary sighed. The officer grabbed the arm of one of the Iranian girls while the other two ran away. He grabbed Raha. She looked down again. David rested his hands in his cheek as if watching a rerun on television. Mary felt her heart beating through her chest.
I feel the energy of concentrated regret coming from the officer. I can feel it, David.
David patiently examined the officer before speaking in his usual drowsy monotone.
I want you to kill him soon enough. I want to see Raha's reaction.
He didn't move.
I don't want to watch her die.
Mary felt her hands sweating as she watched Raha struggle and fall to the ground, long dark hair spilling out. Mary closed her eyes and David tapped her on the shoulder.
Mary, pay attention.
I can't just sit here watching and telling you what happened. It's not right.
Mary felt herself breathing heavy as the girl crawled backwards away from the officer, her face in a state of panic. The officer drunkenly stumbled towards Raha, moving slowly enough to give her time to stand up and run away. He sped up his pursuit, close on her trail. Mary took a knife from her belt. David grabbed a loop on her pants, pulling her back down. She crossed her arms.
What are we even here for, David?
Mary had a chill down her spine as the officer's movements were so clumsy they reminded her of a toddler, still learning to run. Raha jumped over a chain-link fence surrounding the skate park and ran into the city streets. The officer stopped at the fence and laughed, his voice deep and menacing. David tapped Mary on the shoulder. She jumped, startled. He motioned towards the officer, whose hysterics were gradually sounding less and less human.
This is what happens if you abuse your gift.
He sighed in despair.
Kill it, and please don't die, because I won't help you.
He folded his arms and leaned back on the bleachers behind him, as if to take a nap.
Remember, you can command anything with your voice now. Use it for this fight.
It's about time.
Mary took worn daggers from her belt as a quick reminder. She ran over the Old English text on the blades.
1492, Lord Baltimore.
She took a deep breath.
I can do this. I can be strong. Yo, cop, get over here.
She looked at David from the corner of her eye, seeking approval. David rolled his eyes and put his hands in his pockets.
So unprofessional.
He leaned back and looked up at the purple sky. The officer ran clumsy towards Mary. She stared at the creature, bursting with passion. She remained still, unfaltering, as she struggled to remember David's training. The sight of the beast was beyond anything David's unusual, dispassionate, expressionless, and emotionless description could have prepared her for. As it became closer, she seen the true horror of the officer. It was a creature. The monster wore a standard police uniform, but its fresh singe marks made it look as if it had been immersed in a freshly doused blaze, and its eyes had melted, a sticky, thick goo running down its face, and a horrifying mess. It was enough for Mary to temporarily freeze with horror.
Put your arms at your side and turn around,
She commanded. It was merely a reflex from countless hours of instructions. Mary coughed, queasy from the foul stench. It reminded her of spoiled milk and mold. The creature halted mid-stride and obeyed Mary, turning and taking a submissive stance. She walked quick and thrust the knife into the middle of its back, burying it as deep as she could. The officer screamed in a human dread noise that reminded her of her first kill. She tilted her head to the side, twisting the knife, and jumped backwards, covering her face with her sleeve. There was a flash of blue light, the overwhelming roar of the blaze lasting only for a moment. Mary dropped her arm. Before her lay a pile of ash. Her knife lay atop it.
This reminds me of the creature that tried to kidnap me,
She said, "Too bad for him."
that you planned to kidnap me too, my love.
She looked up, curious as to his expression. David had his back to her.
Have you killed it yet?
Mary closed her eyes.
Were you not even watching?
She reached down to retrieve her knife, but instead dropped to one knee, breathing heavily. She put her hand to her head.
My head hurts so bad. Why am I so tired?
David came up behind her and put his hand on her shoulder.
It takes a great deal of spirit to use those commands. Your strength will return, but you need more practice.
David knelt next to Mary.
Remember, if you use it too much, you become one of them, among other horrible fates, just like the others before you.
Mary rolled her eyes, dropping her other knee on the ground, weak and exasperated. Her eyes watered in frustration.
Well, forgive me if I don't
She took another deep breath.
understand commands or whatever else is going on. You won't tell me a thing. How do you expect me to protect you if...
David stretched and yawned loudly, cutting her off. He was clearly bored.
You're right, I did steal you in the night from your room. Remember, you may be my bodyguard, yet you're not only protecting me, but the entire planet. Is that not good enough for you?
Mary stood up, ignoring his last words.
Could you at least tell me who you are?
We have more important things to worry about.
David said. He looked to the fence.
At the moment, before I took you as my own, I told you to treat your friends well. This girl is a friend, and she is in trouble.
Mary grabbed him as she tried to walk away.
How many of these things are here?
David raised his eyebrows if he listened to a ranting of a small child. He calmly took his small notebook out of his pocket with the number 254 handwritten on the cover. He flipped through a few pages quietly, ignoring Mary.
We don't have time for monologues.